Hello, aspiring developers. Hope you're doing fine. Today we are going to introduce the advanced functions in JavaScript. In the previous video, we talked about introducing the types of functions in JavaScript. And in today's video, we're going to learn about the immediately invoked function expressions, the high order functions, the callback functions, the function expressions, and the closure functions. So let's dive right in and explore these functions in JavaScript. Okay, so in Visual Studio Code, let's clear the terminal and then we explore the functions. This commented code is in the previous video where we introduced the basic of functions, and now we want to learn the arrow functions. So arrow functions are simpler in syntax compared to the basic functions, where we write the whole function in almost a single line of code. So let's declare a variable here. Let's say const. What can we use? Let's say chop meat. Then we equate this to a parameter. So let's take let chop meat function take a parameter. Let's say meat. And then we return using the return symbol, which is equal sign and greater than sign. And now here we pass the value that we want to return. For instance, we can say chopped. Pass the variable meat that we've just taken, meat, and we say, what do we say? Is ready for cooking. I can say, yeah, ready for cooking. Ready for cooking. Let me just Alt Z so that you can have everything within one line of code. Use Alt Z. Yeah, so now this is an arrow function. The arrow function is chop meat. It takes meat as a variable and it returns chopped meat. So chopped meat is ready for cooking. So that is an arrow function. Here the function name is chop meat. Then you equate it to the parameter. And the parameter will return the body here, the body of the function. So for instance, you can see here we had a function keyword, and the function name here was sum, and the parameters were num1, num2, and this was the function body. So for the arrow functions, this will be the function name. We don't need the function keyword. You just start that, and then you say it is the argument, or rather the parameter, as in this above one. Then this return keyword is the one that you see here for an example in the function body. Then this is the whatever we need to return is the value of the function. So basically, you can write the whole function in a single line of code, and you declare that to a variable. So let me leave this. Let me uncomment this first one, because if we don't call them, they won't be logged to the console. So they can just be active up there. So when you run this script, you see that you cannot see any outputs. Just like the other functions, you must call the function for it to be logged, for it to be like active or logged to the console. So let's console.log chop meat. But now if you call it just like the other variables, it will still not call the function. Let's see what it does in this output. Yeah, so you see that the function, it outputs function chop meat. But now if you want to call it as a function, you must pass the parenthesis for it to know that that is a function. Yeah, and now you can see chopped and defined, ready for cooking. Even in the previous functions, you saw that when you declare that variable there, or you pass in that parameter, it is declared as a variable, and any declared variable is undefined unless you pass a value to it. So now let's pass a value, let's say like a steak, value steak as our parameter, as an argument to that function. When we run the console, you see that chopped steak is ready for cooking. And there we have our chop meat function. In a single line of code, you define the function, and in the next line, you just call the function. So you see that arrow function makes work easier for us. Now let's explore the next function, which is the expression function. Expressions function. Let me use fx for function. So for the expression function, it just takes the function and has it stored in a variable. So just the same way that you're writing a function is just the same way, but now you store that in a variable. So let's declare a variable here. Let's say let cook tea. Do we really cook tea? Let's say let prepare tea. Let prepare tea. Yeah, then we equate that, or rather we assign it to a value, and the value will be a function. So equals the assignment operator equals function keyword. Now instead of passing the name is prepare tea. So you only say function and then you open the parentheses. Here you can pass in the parameters. So let's say water and milk. Then the curly brackets to start the function body. Here we can return, let's say return, we can return, let's say an string. And in the string we can say my tea has, say my tea is full of milk. So you can just pass the milk variable here using the $sign and the curly brackets. Say the milk, and can also pass the water. Say tea is full of milk and water. Yeah, and you just save that. So that's it for the expression function. The only difference is that the variable name is stored. You just store the variable and then you assign the function as the value of that variable. So now let's call this function. You remember how to call a function. Let me console log this upper one so that we can only have one output in our console. So calling the function prepare tea, you remember that we only type in the prepare tea. Clear this. We only type in the prepare tea and we log it to the console because we don't have it logged to the console inside the function. So let prepare tea. And just as the arrow function, let's clear the terminal. You see that it will output function if you don't have the parentheses. So let's just clear the terminal and then we add the parentheses. And in the parentheses, we can pass in some variables. You see that it works. If you don't pass in the variable, it still works, but with the undefined keywords. See that my T is full of undefined and undefined. So now let's define those variables, those parameters, sorry. We can say water for water and milk for milk. Yeah, so now we've defined the variables. If we run this script, we're going to see that my tea is full of milk and water. Another exciting function in JavaScript is the immediately invoked function expression, commonly denoted as IIFE. So I'll be referring to it as the IIFE function expression. So now think of a function that, let's say, is called immediately, it is invoked. You remember that in previous functions, you were first invoking, creating them, and then later calling them. So for IIFE functions, they are called immediately, they are invoked. The syntax is the double parenthesis, of which think of the first as where you do the function definition, and the second for calling. So the function definition in the first one, just say function, parenthesis, and curly brackets where you're going to pass the block of code. So as I said, the easiest way for you to remember how to write an IIFE is to initialize it with two parentheses. A pair of parentheses where the first one is the calling, the first one is the function definition, and the second is the calling. So now let's go forth and do some operations. Let's just log to the console. You can say log console log. Then here we can pass a string. Let's say my immediately invoked function. So now if you run the terminal, let's say node and the function name, you see that we already have that logged to the console. So different from the previous example, here you see that in the previous example, we were first defining the function and then we were calling the function. We define it up here, like let's say prepare tea, then we call it when we were logging that to the console. But for immediately invoked functions, they are just immediately logged to the console, or rather immediately executed after creation. Like I said, I want you to think of it as the first block of the first pair of parentheses is for definition of the function, and the second pair of parentheses is the one that is used to call the function. So that's it for the immediately invoked function expression. Yeah, so let's look at another set of functions. We can look at the closure functions in JavaScript. So for the closure functions, a closure function, you can think of it as a, now using the kitchen analogy, you can say, think of it as you preserve your favorite, let's say, ingredient, then you use it later. So these functions allow a function to remember the environment in which it was created, even after that environment has gone. So now let's define this closure function. You can say, example, let's say function chop pepper. I believe we can use a function chop pepper. So let's just define it. So function chop pepper. Chop pepper. We used chop meat before, so I believe we can use chop pepper. Let it take an argument, or rather a parameter, pepper. This will specify the type of pepper that you pass in that function. Then our code of block to be printed, we can say we return another function. So here we're going to return a function that will now print, just say function that will print to the, that will log to the console. Let's say it will log the string to the console. So we say return, or rather that returns a string which will later log to the console. So let's return pepper is chopped. Yeah, so now this is our closure function, chop pepper, that takes pepper as a parameter and returns another function, which in turn returns a string, pepper is chopped. So now let's declare a variable. Let's say const. Which one can we use? We can say const add chilies. Add chili. Let's say const add chilies. Then we equate this to, let's say another function, chop pepper. So the not meat, sorry, chop pepper, the one that we just defined up there. Then here we can pass in a parameter. So we can say green pepper. So now let's log this to the console. Let's say console.log, sorry.log. Oh, I'm having a comma here. Console.log. And what we are logging to the console is the add chilies. So let's add here, add chilies into our console. Yeah, so now you see that we first initially defined a function, chop pepper. Then we declared a variable, add chilies. So now if you run this script, you notice that the terminal doesn't have any output. Why? Because add chilies is just a constant, or rather a variable. You can see it's just a variable that we've declared, and the value passed is just chop pepper, which is a function. So when you log it to the console, you must add the parentheses for your console to know that you're calling a function, or you're logging a function to the console. So let's just run the script here at our terminal. You see that my immediately invoked function, okay, let me comment out this first so that it does not confuse us in the terminal. Then I can clear the terminal so you can see only what you're dealing with. Sorry, clear. Yeah, so that's it. Now you see that if we run this script, you're going to see pepper is chopped. Now we are able to access our closure function. Yeah, so we declared a variable add chilies, and we want to use it such that you can see the chilies that you're adding. So I'm going to just call this pepper variable, or rather parameter that we passed in the chop pepper function. And I'm going to use the backticks so that we can use template literals. Backticks in the start and in the stop. Yeah, so we are passing the argument into our into whatever we are passing in the console. So now when you run the script, you can see that green pepper is chopped. So now this function chop paper takes an argument paper, and then it returns a function which in turn returns a string paper is chopped. So you see, when you declare a variable add chilies and you pass the function as your parameter, you are able to, as your value, sorry, you are able to pass in the parameter green peppers that is defined here in the add chilies variable. And then now if you log that to the console, you'll be able to see that green pepper is chopped. So that's how closure function works. And now let me go ahead and comment out this console.log so that we don't call it anymore. We only want to output the next function that we're going to access on our console when we log it. So now let's look at the next. The next we're looking at is the high order functions. I'll denote them as HOF, FX. So the higher order functions, these are likely the multitasking appliances in our kitchen. So you can say, you can define a higher order function as a function which can take another function as an argument or return a function as a result. So now let's look at the syntax of the higher order function. Remember, it can take a function as an argument or return a function as a result. So now let's define an expression function. We're going to use an arrow function. So let's say const with source as our function name, with source equals, here we can say equals, we take the first parameter, maybe you can say source, then we return dish, which is also another argument, and then we return dish, another argument. So the first source that we're writing, that is the argument of our parameter of our function source with source. Then dish is the argument, which is a new function that returns the argument of a new function, which now returns serving, and say serving, you pass there dish, and you can say with, you pass the variable source. Yeah. So that's our function with source. See that it takes a parameter source and it returns another function dish. Let me just do this on new lines. So this is not the correct syntax. I'm only doing it to show you the flow of how the program moves. So first, it takes a parameter source with source function, takes the parameter source, and then it returns the result as a new function, which is now dish, a new function which takes a parameter dish, and this new function returns serving dish with source to the console. So the new function dish, this is what it returns as its value. So let's first resave it with the correct syntax. So that is our high order function. You can say high order arrow function if you like. Yeah, so now let's use an earlier function or a simpler function to explain the high order function. Let's use the function sum. Rather, let's just use the one that is closer to it, this closure function. So you see, there is the closure function. There is this function definition, the function name and parameter, and whatever is being returned. So just like the normal functions, and then this is how it's being called, sorry. So the same way to that, our higher order function also has these return statements, which are denoted by the equal and the greater than sign. So this equal and greater than, that is the return statement. Whatever is output after that is the value that is being returned. Then you see it has parameters, or rather it takes arguments, just like this function, these other functions that we had already defined earlier. So it also has the function body, the function definition, and the return statement. So that's how a basic higher order function is being defined, or rather the syntax of a basic high order function. Let's call this function with source. So just like every other function, a high order function is also a function that can be used only when called, and it can be called after definition. So this is how an high order function is being called. Just paste this. So you pass the parenthesis. For the normal functions, you just write the function name and you pass in one parenthesis to the when calling it. Maybe you want to display to the console. But for the higher order functions, you have to pass two parentheses, because remember we said that higher order functions, they take other functions as inputs or return the other functions as results. So we'll first pass the first parameter. In our case here, you can say tomato sauce, because the first with sauce function takes an input, which is sauce, and here we'll say tomato sauce. And then you can remember that it takes a second input in the second function, which is the dish. The dish, we can say here French fries, common dish. In Kenya, we call them chips. So now this is the with sauce function. It takes sauce as a parameter or as an argument, and that's what we pass. Then it returns another function. So it returns another function which takes dish as a parameter. Previous functions, we were passing the arguments with comma separation. But because this is not a normal function, you have to pass the first argument of the first parameter of the first function, then the next argument of the next function. So the next function here, you see it takes French fries as the input, and this French fries are an argument to which represents the dish, which is also another function. So let's just run this script. You see that you can now see our console is logged with serving French fries with tomato sauce. And that is how the high order functions work. So let me just let me comment this out so that you can check on another function. Callback functions are another important functions in JavaScript. These are functions which are passed into other functions as an argument, which is then invoked inside that outer function for it to complete maybe some kind of a task or a routine or an action. So they are passed into another function as an argument, and then they'll be invoked inside the outer function. Remember, there are two functions. So they're invoked inside the outer function to complete some kind of routine. Using the real world simulation, you can think of it as going to a bakery and ordering some cake, and then they call you when that cake is ready. So now let's define a function bake cake. So this function bake cake will take maybe flavor as an argument, and now it takes callback as the second argument. So now inside the body of this bake cake function, we are going to log to the console whatever the bake cake function is doing. Like maybe you can now say log to the console, then you say baking. Let me use template literal, so backticks. Let's say baking. Then you pass in the flavor that you want to. Sorry, I was to use backticks. Yeah, backticks. Then you say baking. You can pass in the flavor of that cake that you're baking or that you've been ordered to bake. Yeah, so you just say baking a flavor, then cake. So now you defined a function, bake cake, that logs to the console, baking a flavored cake. For our definition, we said that these are functions that are passed into another function as an argument, then they are invoked inside the outer function to complete some kind of routine or action. So now we are going to call the callback function. And outside it, now outside the, callback with a semicolon. So here our function is bake cake, which logs to the console, having a flavored cake. You can have the callback function. You can call the callback function outside the bake cake function, and it will still log to the console whatever that function does, whatever that function body does. So now let's call this bake cake function, and just like every other function, this one takes two parameters. So you must pass the two parameters. In our case, the first one is the flavor. So we can pass in the flavor, let's say black forest, or should we say red velvet? Yeah, Black Forest. The second parameter is the callback function. So you pass it as a function, and the simplest way we can use the arrow functions. So you just take the parenthesis, then the arrow, the equal and the greater than sign to represent the return statement, then the curly brackets where the block of code to be executed is passed. So here we can say maybe console, we logged you first see that we took the flavor as Black Forest, and now the callback function is the one that is here we have passed as an arrow function, and now we want to write the body of that arrow function. So we can log the console, maybe something like the cake is ready. So you are now notifying the client that the cake is ready for pickup. So just say cake is ready. Let me just expand this for easier notification, where you can easily see that you're passing the first parameter as the Black Forest, and you're passing the second parameter as a callback, and you remember that the callback is a function. So that's how a callback function looks like. Let's run this script so that we can see how it behaves in the console. So we are now calling the bake cake function. So let's run our script. Just go to the terminal so you can see how both behave. Node, script. And you see that to our console, you have output baking a Black Forest cake, and the cake is ready. So this console baking a Black Forest cake is the one that is in the function, in the bake cake function. And then the function, the arrow function, or rather the callback function, is the cake is ready function. So you see that is also printed, or rather logged to the console. So that's how a callback function works. But remember, you can even you can call the callback outside the bake cake function, because we are saying that a callback function is that in which it is passed into another function as an argument, just like we've done in our bake cake function, and then it is invoked, or rather called in the outer function. So callback function, the higher order function, the closure function, the immediately invoked function, expression function, and the arrow function, which stands to be my best function because you see it has a simpler syntax of defining just the normal function, and can be reused in several other places. If you've watched to this point, I really take the opportunity to thank you for investing your time with us. If you like the content, please hit the thumbs up button, share our video widely, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Write down in the comments whatever you feel is unclear, or where you feel you should do some better work, or if still you want to appreciate us for the work we've done, just do it down in the comment section, and we'll appreciate your feedback. Thank you for watching to this point. Have a happy coding week.